Welcome to Deloitte Global's TMT predictions for 2021. We are in the midst of dramatic shifts. Even though the SARS coronavirus 2 is only 100 nanometers across, it has catalyzed big changes that will continue to affect the way we work and live. The story of 2021 will be driven by finding the right balance between humans and technology, society, and the economy. These are Deloitte's 9 predictions for 2021. Number 1. Edge computing and intelligence bring the potential for faster, less expensive, and more secure operations in everything from autonomous vehicles to virtual reality to the Internet of Things. The world appears to be on track to a 4th industrial revolution. Number 2. Cloud migration. Moving to the cloud is not only helping organizations deal with the pandemic, it is also positioning them to thrive beyond it. The growth of cloud services is likely to continue in 2021 and beyond. Number 3. In times of uncertainty, conspiracy theories abound. Concerns about 5G's health risks are widespread, but we expect that the use of 5G will continue to prove safe. Education needs to be consistent, and it needs to begin now. Number 4. Meet the next generation radio access network, also known as Open RAN. We predict that more than 80% of core wireless network deployments will be virtualized by 2023, and Open RAN has the potential to revolutionize the telecom industry. Number 5. The gender gap in sports revenue is beginning to close. It will take time, but the industry must continue to invest in opportunities for women's sports in order to capitalize on the revenue potential. Look for record-breaking attendance and viewership as the upward trend continues. Number 6. The hyper-quantified athlete. Data is fundamentally changing sports. Look for this explosion of athlete data to raise new questions about how best to use it and how to do so ethically. Number 7. Sales of 8K TVs are likely to reach US $3.3 billion in 2021. It's not just about entertainment. 8K TVs will also be used for gaming, work, and commercial purposes. Number 8. COVID-19 protocols have given digital reality headsets an opportunity to prove their usefulness in the enterprise and in education. We're projecting that unit sales of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality headsets will double over 2019 levels. Number 9. Of all the activities that COVID-19 brought online, video doctor's visits may be the one that caused the most personal trepidation. But with many people changing their minds, we expect that video doctor's visits will become the new normal for the long term. Most of these shifts were already in the process of happening, but have been pulled forward by years or even decades because of the pandemic catalyst. When the catalyst is removed, will our post-pandemic world see change decelerate? Only time will tell. But our trajectory has been permanently altered. Get the full reports to learn more. Visit Deloitte.com/predictions to see what Deloitte predicts.
Good afternoon. My name is Darrell Hanbury and I lead our TMT industry group here at Deloitte in Ireland. I'm delighted to have you join us today where we will be hosting 2 exciting panel discussions providing insights from our Deloitte TMT prediction series. Louise Kelly, a tax partner here at Deloitte, will join me in moderating the first panel discussion, which will cover the topics of increased visibility and the monetization of female sports and the role of data in sport. We're also joined by special guests, Paul Lee, who's our Global Head of TMT Research for Deloitte, and of course Nicci Daly, hockey legend, World Cup silver medalist and Tokyo-bound Olympian. Our second panel discussion will focus on the future of cloud, and my colleagues Peter Glynn, Consulting Partner, along with Nicola Grant, TMT Director, will moderate this panel. They will be joined by Juliet Bramwell, Head of Telco and Media with Google, and Rory Allen, Deloitte Consulting Partner and Cloud Lead for Deloitte in Ireland. Right, to kick things off, let me start by introducing Paul Lee, our Global Head of TMT Research. Paul is a Deloitte partner based in the UK who leads the industry's research, specialising in technology, media and telecommunications. His approach spans qualitative research, undertaking large-scale surveys of consumer behaviour, testing devices, analysing video games and watching TV. Perfect COVID environment material. He presents his research findings with clients across multiple industries in the UK and the rest of EMEA. Paul leads our Deloitte TMT predictions and our digital consumer trends programs. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So we're going to focus on 3 of our predictions today, Paul. Talk us through the first prediction on the monetization of women's sports. What's the current status?
Yeah, so what we're expecting for 2021 is that globally, women's elite sports will generate about $100 million in revenues, which sounds quite big unless you contrast it with the total for elite sports overall, which on the spectator side, in a normal year, so non-COVID year, would be about $250 billion. So that's quite a massive cleft between those two numbers. And you may think, well, men's sport is intrinsically worth more. And in terms of some of the pillars of revenues, so let's say spectators or TV audiences, men's sport does attract more. But the gulf isn't that big. And I just wonder if I can just share some stats with you. So if you think of, for example, like the Women's World Cup, which was held in 2019, there are almost 1 billion viewers of that event and 250 million for the final. And in the UK, one of the games, which was against the US team, had the biggest TV audience of any genre for that year. So there's a really, really big variation. And then just looking at, say, audience numbers before COVID hit, some of the matches which are being held for football in Spain and the UK and even Mexico were attracting tens of thousands of attendees. So really great numbers. So, it's not as good as a men's game, but it doesn't necessarily explain that enormous cleft between the value of the men's game and the women's game.
So why, Paul, does those higher viewers, in-person attendees, not translate to higher monetization and higher revenues for the women's sports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what it comes down to, I think, is the degree of professionalization of women's elite sports, which is still very nascent for lots of historical reasons, stretching back actually millennia in terms of how women's sports has been treated and in some regards constrained. And I think where we're at the moment is where you see more professionalization, for example, of the sale of TV rights, you can see revenues starting to rise, but they're from very low numbers. So if I look at, for example, basketball in the US, so the women's NBA, the TV rights there are worth $25 million per year. $25 million, a big number. But the men's game is over 100 times more. For the Women's Super League in England and Wales, there have just been some new rights negotiated with professional negotiators. And the rights are about £8 million per year. The men's game, 200 times greater. And in Spain, it's 333 times greater. But what I expect is as you get more professionalization of negotiation, more splitting out of the women's game in different regards, then you get more revenues flowing in, you get more viewing, you get more interest, more commercial involvement. So you get this great virtuous cycle coming in. So I hope by the end of the decade, we'll be way beyond $1 billion in revenues for women's elite sports.
Super, sounds good. Moving on to a related prediction, Paul, around data, technology and sports. Maybe give us an overview there.
Yeah, so when we look at sports, this has always been about quantification. And again, going back since the start of time. And as technology evolves, the ability to quantify just gets better and richer and vaster. If vaster is a word, actually. So this is steadily improving. And so one of the benefits is, we've got Moore's law, which permeates everything that we do. And a manifestation of that is the ability to quantify more and more. And you may remember things like the Fitbit, which aren't actually that old. So they're just over a decade old. And if you take that consumer application, apply it to athletes, and look at all the sensors which are available and being manufactured by the billions every single year, then you can start measuring so many more things. And you can start measuring, for example, the time taken between an athlete sprinting and recovering, or G-forces at the point of contact, say for scrums. So all of this data can be used for training. It can also be used to satisfy all the geeks out there who love metrics around sports and love memorizing them. And can also be used for other applications like betting.
Yeah, so to mention that, because I think when people think of data, they think of it'll help the sports people improve their performance. But you've talked through, or you've mentioned there perhaps some of the other benefits. You might want to just elaborate on that.
Yeah, so for the coaching staff, all these analytics make a massive difference. And one of the ways in which we look at this, it's partly about the monitors that the athletes have on them, but it's also the video analytics, which are a real theme, I think, of this decade, which are coming through far more strongly. So if I think of, for example, like Manchester City, all of their training staff have been sent on courses to operate drones. And the reason why is so that as they're going through their training sessions, they can get the overhead view, which normally only the pundits have, to see how their players are measuring up in terms of keeping their formation, keeping their discipline, etc. But that's one aspect. So another aspect which we don't often think about is how does this feed into, for example, the entertainment sector, into video games? And I guess some of the people who are watching this may have, for research purposes, of course, played games like FIFA. The thing about these games is that they are updated every single week with the latest results. And the equivalent of FIFA in the US, one of the equivalents is a game called Madden, which is based on American football. And the sensors from the players feed into personalizing the avatars on the screen. So if a player is carrying an injury, that can be reflected in the player. So it adds a lot more nuance to the game. And I think over time, by the end of the decade, video games will be barely distinguishable from the real thing. And it's partly through the caliber of the image, but also because of the accuracy of the avatar.
Brilliant. Wow, I look forward to that. We're going to cover cloud in our second panel discussion. You might give us a current view of cloud growth and perhaps how COVID and the pandemic affected that growth trajectory.
Yeah, so with cloud, cloud's been around for a couple of decades, and like any good technology, it was going through a kind of predictable growth curve. So you get like a very sharp period of acceleration, which happened over a decade ago, triple-digit growth, and then it would like moderate to high double-digit, and then become like a mature sector with good, strong revenues, but not very strong growth. And that was what was happening towards the end of the last decade. And then in the last year, cloud growth re-accelerated and hit over 30%. And we expect that to be maintained, that level of growth for the first few years of this decade up to 2025. And so we're looking at revenues of over $150 billion for the 5 largest hyperscalers. So that's a really significant amount of revenue, but you consider that's $35 billion more than the prior year. So a massive leap in revenues. And I think it's really worth asking, so was it the pandemic that caused it? And that's partly it. So it was the migration or the accelerated migration to the cloud to enable applications like this. But it's also down to other factors like access to other applications. And I think also as companies get more aware of climate targets, then cloud comes in even more.
Do you want to talk through just in terms of how the growth in cloud and sustainability go hand in hand?
Yeah. So one of the things around cloud is that, so on the internet, there's a lot of misinformation about the impact of data centers in general. And so you will find articles saying that using a data center or even downloading an app is really bad for the environment. And a lot of that is certainly for the largest data centers, just not true. So when we look at how much electricity do data centers use, it's about 1%. And if we look at how much energy did data centers use a decade ago, it was about 1%. But over that time, the number of data centers and the volume of computer processors which they're handling has really gone up. So basically what's happened is that data centers have become a lot more efficient. And it's down to various different factors. So customized chips is one. Another factor is where you locate data centers, because that enables the cooling to be a lot less energy intensive. And also co-locating data centers next to power sources reduces the loss of power within the grid. Now, the thing about the hyperscalers data centers is that there is a capability to create new data center capacity at a regular basis, and no enterprise really could keep up with that pace of progress. So for a company to reduce its carbon footprint, one of the options is to migrate its computing work, or a share of it, over into the cloud to tap into that much lower efficiency, that much greater efficiency. And it's also worth considering, one of the big shifts that we've got is a move to renewable power. And a lot of large tech companies are some of the biggest investors in renewable power, be it solar or wind power. And so that's also another aspect that you're able to tap into by migrating to a hyperscaler's data center.
Brilliant. I think that set the scene perfectly, Paul. Are you ready to join the panel?
Look forward to it.
Brilliant. So I'm going to pass over now to Louise, who's going to introduce the first panel discussion.
Thanks, Daryl. Welcome, Nicci. We're really delighted to have you here today, well, virtually at least. For those that don't know Nicci is an Irish international hockey player who was part of the historic team who won World Cup silver in 2018 and qualified Team Ireland for the Tokyo Olympic Games. Nicci also has a master's in motorsports engineering and comes from a renowned family of motorsport racers. Nicci's also founder of Formula Female, which is an initiative to encourage girls and women to both participate in motor racing as a sport, but also to use motorsport as a platform for STEM education. Paul, thanks for continuing to stay with us to join the panel discussion today. And Nicci, Paul will have gone through some of the Deloitte TMT predictions around women and sport, as well as the use of data in sport. So really interesting to hear your perspective around those, obviously given your sporting career, as well as your motorsports background. So Daryl, do you want to kick off?
Thanks, Lise. Welcome, Nicci, and great to have you here. So I suppose the first thing, the question on everyone's lips is how are the preparations going for the Olympics, and how has the pandemic impacted all of that?
Well, first of all, thanks a million for having me. It's great to be here today. And yeah, I think, it's probably a question that everyone would love to know the answer to, and how our preparations have been going over the last year. Obviously, Tokyo and Olympics are usually a 4-year cycle, but it's a little bit different in that we've an extended year due to the global pandemic that's happened. But we've been very lucky with our squad to be able to come together since last September and maintain a really close-knit bubble where we've been able to train 5 days a week pretty much since September. And we've actually been lucky enough to get a number of matches, which we count ourselves quite lucky, because looking at other nations around the world, they haven't actually managed to be able to play any competitive games. So, we are hopeful that we're, preparing as best we can, given the situation that we're in. We've managed to avoid contracting COVID or having any sort of incidents within the team or within the bubble. So we've managed to keep it very small, and our bubble is tight. And yeah, the preparations are going well. We've played a good few matches now against Spain, and we played against GB both here and away in England last week. So there's a lot of positive stuff happening. There's still a little bit of work to do, I think, but we've got European Championships coming up next month, and that'll be a huge sort of pre-run, pre-tournament for Tokyo, which will give us a great insight to where we really are compared to the top nations. So yeah, it's been a long year, but it's been really productive, and I think that we're really happy with where we are, all things considered.
Great. Well, yeah, it's certainly a number of exciting ones ahead, Nicci. And I suppose you've already been planning for life after hockey in one way, given, I suppose, what you've been doing around motorsports. Maybe talk to us a little bit about your love of motorsports and particularly the initiative that you're doing around the female agenda.
Yeah, I think, there's probably two sides to me, in the sense that there's the hockey side, and then there's another passion of mine, which is motorsport. I grew up in a motor racing family. My dad was a racing driver in Ireland for over 20 years. My uncle, made it all the way to Formula One, which is quite incredible when you think of, Formula One and an Irish driver getting that far. And so it's just been something that I've grown up around my whole entire life, and I really have had a passion for it from when I was really small. If I'm perfectly honest, I would have liked to have been a racing driver myself, but I went down a different path and it didn't quite work out that way. But I studied mechanical engineering in college, and I've always been, fascinated with the cars and how they perform and how they engineer them to be these kind of like rockets on the track. And so I decided that that's what I was going to do. I went to England and studied a master's in motorsport engineering. And then I went and worked for a racing team in the States on the Indy Lights program, which is the Road to IndyCar program, and worked as a data engineer there. And it was sort of through my experience of working within the sport and studying the sport that I noticed that there was, very few females involved. And it wasn't necessarily that I had a bad experience of being, a minority or one of very few. It was actually the complete opposite. I had such a great experience and I loved it. I mean, my office was the pit lane, and I was just watching these cars going 200 miles an hour down the track. It was like, wow, like, why is there not more girls doing this? This is amazing. And it was more so the positive experience that I had that I wanted to share it with as many as I could. I wanted to open it up, and I want to let them know that, like, this is a potential career opportunity. And I knew that nobody in Ireland really knew about it, because, whenever I told them that I was doing it, they were like, what? And so when I came back, I set up an initiative, a sort of a platform called Formula Female to, one, I suppose, highlight those that were involved in the sport, whether it was racing drivers, female racing drivers, or female mechanics, or engineers, or team principals, or just really anyone who's working within the sport. And then later on, I came up with an initiative to, actually open the sport up to young girls all around Ireland. And it's called the Go Girls Karting Initiative, which I launched in partnership with Motorsport Ireland and an Irish team called CJJ Motorsports. And the idea around that was to basically bring young girls into the sport and to bring these subjects to life, like science, technology, engineering, and maths, and give them a sense of what it would be like to be involved in motorsport, both from a racing point of view, if it was driving that they were interested in, or if it was, being more involved in the engineering and the technical side of it. So that I launched that in 2019, and it's been a really big success so far. Obviously, with COVID, we've had to limit the amount of exposure that we've had to it, but the good news is we're hoping to pick it back up in September this year, and continue to just reach out and open up the sport to as many young girls and even women. I mean, I've had grown women get onto me, and I've had two girls who've just now started the course that I did in Cranfield in the UK, because it's something that they've always been interested in and never really had the encouragement maybe to go for it. And it's great to see them now kind of following the same path that I did, and to know that the initiative can have that impact on even just one person. So.
Oh, well done. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like, and particularly in terms of, obviously, and I've heard clips of, I think, both your father and your uncle racing, and they were in the golden era of sport, of motorsport, golden era for Ireland, one might say the golden era of motorsport in general. I assume that's where you got your love, but how do you encourage others to go into the masters in motorsport, which are quite niche? How do you get more and more females to do that?
I think honestly, like a lot of it comes down to like visibility and again opportunity, like by kind of giving them the first step and getting them into a program like the Go Girls Karting Initiative. It gives them that little bit of encouragement and confidence to feel like, and by me sharing my story, I think when young girls can have that sort of they see themselves in a woman that's done it. It can empower them to think, well, I can do it. If these girls can do it, then what's to say I can't? And to kind of normalize it a little bit by showing a number of different women who are involved in the sport. I mean, I also work with a young racing driver here in Ireland called Alex Colby, and she's 16, and she holds the lap record around Modelo Park and a couple of different karting tracks around the country. And she's one of very few females doing it, but I think she's such a powerful role model. And when she comes along to these experience days and she's talking to 15 and 16-year-olds her own age, they see reflections of themselves in her and say, well, wow, she can do it. Why can't I? And so I think visibility and role models is a huge part of trying to encourage more women into. It's like that in any role. It's not just in motorsport, but in sport in general or in business. The more female representation that you see, the more likely you are to impact the next generation and to inspire. So
yeah, and that can't see, can't be theme, Nicci, I think is hugely important. And do you think that applies to other forms of diversity? So Lewis Hamilton would have been quite vocal, say, in Formula One this year around ethnic diversity. We've heard comments around maybe social class diversity. I don't know, does that apply to all of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think what Lewis is trying to do is, and it's probably something that motorsport has had attached to it for a very long time, which it does have an element of elitism attached to it, or seen to be elitist because of maybe how expensive it is to get involved. And I know that Lewis certainly didn't come from a background like that, and he'll say himself he's very lucky with the opportunities that he had. And again, it comes back to this sort of like opportunity and opening the sport up. Formula One are making more of a commitment to that change, and it's great to see because they have to do it from the top and filter it down, through to the lower levels. And I think even with the likes of the Netflix Drive to Survive series, it opens the sport up to so many more people, and it gives them an insight to what's happening. It's that accessibility, that ability to actually feel connected to the sport. And even with the likes of the Go Girls Initiative, and you see other initiatives out there that are trying to just open the sport up to everyone and anyone. It's not, we're trying to get away from this elitist maybe tag that is associated with it. And so I think that, even if you go back to the women in motorsport, they've just come out with 2 years ago, the Women Only series, which in ways has had there's been a lot of criticism around it because they think it can look like it's segregation. But I think the biggest thing that it's doing is again providing opportunity to put female racing drivers at the top level. And they've just partnered with Formula One this year for 8 races. So I mean, to have female drivers racing on the biggest platform in the world and having that exposure and having that access to Formula One teams, it's exactly what the sport needs. And I think what Lewis is trying to do is on another side, again, trying to, make it open for everyone, not just women, but for everyone. And I think it's great to have, someone like him who is so successful. Again, it goes back to that visibility and for him to want to be able to make that change. He's the best person for it in the sport. So.
Yeah, because as you said, obviously that kind of increased participation hopefully will then, provide opportunities to more people.
Exactly.
I know, Nicci, you've had some involvement with IWish, I think, in the past, and I suppose there are some interesting statistics from IWish around the correlation between girls that play team sports are much more likely to take STEM subjects for the junior cert and leaving cert, and also more likely to enter into a more male-dominated industry. Is that something you've observed, and do you have thoughts maybe as to why the stats are like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting stat, and it's actually something that I wasn't really aware of until recently. But and then I started to think about it a little bit, and actually, like, there does seem to be, like, in close to my own sphere, like in the Irish hockey team, I think there's about 5 of us who studied engineering and science and those kind of related subjects. And I wouldn't have really put 2 and 2 together. But, you know, I think when you play sport, I think there is an element of, you know, maybe for me, it's always been about sort of like achieving something, but also like there being a way to do it. So I don't know whether that's something that maybe playing sport has that same ability, and working in engineering of this kind of process focus has something to do with it. But I do think it's interesting, and maybe the fact that sport can be exciting, and if you can bring sort of any sort of technology and science into that, it's a great way to be exposed to both.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's great.
Yeah, and I assume there's probably a piece of mental resilience there, because I think for those who followed, say, for example, both the 2018 World Cup and the qualifying campaign, you didn't make it easy on everyone's nerves as we were going through. But I assume being central to that, you were obviously very much part of it, and you can't have those nerves. You need to push beyond. And I don't know whether that you find that helps when you're looking at a STEM type career or.
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm not like, I know that when I started out in my STEM career, there was, instances where I probably did feel at times, was this the right career for me? Like, because maybe there wasn't a lot of women there, but I just knew it was something that I was so passionate about that I wasn't really going to let it stand in my way. But I was aware of it, and I do remember like walking in the first day of the racing team that I worked for, and it was just all lads, and I could kind of see them looking at me as if to say like, who's she? And I was like, hey, I'm the new engineer, and they're like, all right. And it was a bit like, not that I don't know whether they did look at me and think that, or maybe I just perceived that that's the way they were thinking. But it turned out that they completely respected me for the engineer that I was and the job that I was there to do. And again, that's why I feel like I had such a positive experience when I was there. But it doesn't stop you from thinking those ways and feeling like that. So there is still an element, I think, for women in sort of male-dominated careers to have that feeling. But I think the more and more they see, and I think it is changing now. Like, I look at teams in the States now that would have been there when I worked there, and it's only 4 years ago. And there is more female engineers and mechanics working in the team. So I think it is changing, and it should make it a little bit easier for any girls who are considering STEM careers to feel a little bit more confident about going down that route. Super.
Look, you're obviously a successful hockey player as well, even if that might have not been your first love, as you describe it, but and you're part of a successful team. So what part does success play in attracting fans, support, sponsorship, etc.? Is success the key to it, or are there other things like branding, media coverage, etc., that really plays that role?
I think they both really play a role. I think success obviously is huge for the sport. And, you look at our fairy tale journey that we went on, and how the likes of Softco, our sponsor, they reap the benefits of being part of that journey and that story. And also, they had, obviously the branding was there as well. But I think obviously the success is hugely important for continuing the momentum. And I think that women's sport, especially here in Ireland, we've managed to do that. I mean, you're just hearing success stories all the time now about different women in sport in Ireland. Even just last week with, the first female diver to ever qualify for an Olympic. So, there's new history being made all the time. And I think women's sport is on such a momentum at the minute. But yeah, I think in order to keep that going, obviously success plays a huge role. But the other side of it is branding then as well, like, and TV coverage is a huge part of that. And I think that we can do better with having more females shown on TV and being shown at peak times when other maybe men's sports are being shown, that we actually get those time slots as well to really give back to the branding and the sponsors that are going to support the journey.
Yeah, no, and Paul, I might bring you in here. It's interesting, and Nicci did mention it. Irish people, we love a bandwagon, and the hockey team was the bandwagon of 2018. But to put into context of some of the stats we were talking earlier about viewerships, their quarter final had about 120,000 people in Ireland watched it, which is a large sporting occasion. Double that watched the semi-final, and they almost got 450,000 people. 43% of the total audience watched the final. It was the most watched sporting event in Ireland outside the main sports since Katie Taylor won gold medal in the Olympics. So it was huge. So in terms of your perspective and what you're seeing, what's the next step in the monetization, and what role does either the success of the teams, or what can they be doing to assist in that?
Yeah, so it's very much, as Nicci was talking about, it's a virtuous cycle. So television is great for making people aware that you've got lots of great female athletes, and that brings in the sponsors. And the great thing about women's sports is, a corporate sponsor could say get them a shoulder patch on men's elite sports, but they could get the whole shirt for women's sports. And when you have a team that does well, the exposure is phenomenal, and that brings in more sponsors. And one of the things which shocked me actually when I was looking at the state of women's sports was there are so few teams which have even 2 sponsors for the women's team. So I think Barcelona added a second sponsor for the women's team. And this is a team which is in the Champions League final for women's, and they've only got 2 sponsors. And then, as you get more money coming in, you've got more training, and probably Nicci's seen that the variation in training spend for the men's game versus the women's game. But there are more and more teams which are providing access to the men's team's facilities as well. And as all of that happens, the caliber of women's sport will just improve, and it will make it an ever better spectator experience. And so you'll get more match day attendance, more TV viewing, more corporate sponsorship.
I think on that as well, I think where women's sport can do more is they can actually, look at the female athletes themselves and share who they are and bring out the personalities of these females and their stories, because, it's people are interested in it. People do watch it, and they do watch the games and they watch the sport, but how much do they really know about the actual athlete themselves? And giving that kind of exposure to the athlete, their story, their personality is another way of increasing the viewership and the overall audience, I think.
Yeah.
And kind of building, I suppose, a connection or loyalty, I suppose, then, and following, I suppose, with that. I
was saying that, and there's a responsibility, I think, potentially on some of the athletes to do that, because I know, Nicci, we've probably stalked you a little bit on social media, and the two things that I saw, and one which I'd seen at the time was obviously, Mariah Carey got on that bandwagon in 2018, if I remember. You might just want to explain how Mariah Carey got on the Ireland Olympic hockey bandwagon.
Yeah, in the middle of July. That came about because basically we'd never been to a World Cup before, and anyone on our team had never been. The last time we had qualified for a World Cup was 2002. So, being there, we were the second lowest ranked team going in. There was very little expectation on us. And as a team, it was the first time we went to a tournament where there was no pressure on us, because usually you go to a tournament to either qualify. So there's, you have to either qualify or you don't, or you're trying to fight elimination or relegation. So you're trying to stay up. So there's always something. You can never just go to a tournament and play and be like, if it went well, it went well. And if it didn't, there was nothing, you had nothing to lose. And the World Cup was that tournament for us. And it was this, one of the biggest tournaments that we could have been at. So, a lot of the young girls in particular kind of felt like it was like Christmas, like waking up on the eve of the first match and waking up that morning felt like Christmas to them, because it was just like, oh my God, this is the best thing in our hockey journey so far, is to wake up and be getting ready to walk out and play in a World Cup. And so, yeah, Christmas morning, Mariah Carey, she became our morning song. We used to walk down to a little area in the middle of London to do our morning mobility while people were going to work and they were walking past us, and we had Mariah Carey blaring in the middle of the street, in the middle of July, and it was like 30 degrees heat. So, but it was great that Mariah jumped on the bandwagon as well. We really enjoyed that.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah, success, brings everyone behind and stuff to support, doesn't it? And Nicci, maybe moving on, say, to the use of data in sport. So what are your observations, I suppose, in terms of the use of it in sports, in general, and particularly obviously in a field sport like hockey, compared to motorsports, where I suppose it's been embedded for probably a lot longer. So maybe just, your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so like I think, in motorsport, it's amazing. I suppose when you look at like what they're trying to look for in terms of performance, it can come down to like hundreds and thousands of a second. So they have sensors on absolutely everything. I mean, there could be over 300 sensors on a Formula One car. In fact, I might even be way off there. It could be way more. So, obviously they're using sensors to track every piece or every movement that the car is making and every input that the driver is making as well. Ultimately to try and find that added bit of performance, whether it's a tenth or 100th or 1000th of a second. So like the data has been around for so long in motorsport, and it's vital, and it's used, I suppose, mostly to kind of validate, the driver is the most important person in the car, and the engineers and the mechanics, they rely heavily on the feedback from the driver. But if the driver can be so in tune with what the car is doing, and they can use the data to validate what they're saying, they know that where they're focusing their attention or their design or their their engineering, they're focusing it in the right place based on what the data is telling.
So they are building extra confidence kind of on that feedback loop as such. And
I suppose other sports are only maybe starting to catch up with that now in terms of GPS and I mean, but data in a whole other way. Like, I mean, looking at the performance of the athlete in terms of even nutrition, sleep, muscle soreness. I mean, every morning we have to fill in a data set in the morning about how we've slept, how many hours we slept, how we're feeling, how our muscles feel, how we are mentally. And it's all this, you're trying to get an image, I suppose, with data about how the athlete is actually performing and what contributes to good performance and bad performance. And then, on pitch, you've got the GPS, you've got your number of accelerations, your decelerations, your high intensity meters, so they're tracking everything, and they can try and correlate then what maybe a good GPS output is to a good performance. But I think there is that, and it can be used in those ways. But sometimes I think if you look too closely at data, you can kind of get lost in a bit of a hole and actually lose sight of the main goal or the bigger picture. So I do remember learning a lot from an engineer I worked with in the racing team in the States about, don't get lost in the data, because, you can start to concoct all these different ideas about what you think is happening. But really, at the end of the day, he kind of said the stopwatch doesn't lie. So I think you can use data in ways, but I think sometimes if you're driven completely by the numbers, like as a hockey player, even if you're driven by numbers and stats and things like that, you kind of lose your instinct and your kind of killer edge a little bit. So I think data is good in ways, but as long as it's used and not overused is important, I think.
Paul, you might have kind of other thoughts around this as well, around data.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about motorsport, because it is one of those sports which has been at the pinnacle of data collection, and it's also at the pinnacle of data transmission. And some of the earliest adoptions of 5G in a private environment have been for motorsport, I think with the US slightly ahead of what's happening, say, for Formula One. And there is so much data which can be collected. And so creating like a private 5G network for a track is where we're going to go next. And part of the benefit of that will be the ability to get more data and richer data, and for that to move faster. then also for some of the teams, they're sending their data back to their base, which may be thousands of miles away. But there's edge computing capability coming in, which allows that analysis to happen on the site. And the benefit of that is you get the information back faster. And again, these are fractions of a second, but data can only move at the speed of light. And the speed of light over 1,000 miles is a delay. And so it's really interesting to see how really advanced technologies can be deployed in sports first, because it's where a thousandth of a second matters, whereas in many other areas it doesn't.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, we obviously at Deloitte are working with McLaren Motorsports, I think, in terms of data analytics and helping them improve. And it is that little edge, that fraction or thousandth or hundredth of thousandth of a second makes a huge difference. Just a final question for you. I've applied my own data analytics, and you were the 16th ranked female team going into the Hockey World Cup in 2018. You're now the 8th ranked team in the world. You came second the last time. Does that mean we're all going to be singing Mariah Carey with gold medals in Dame Street?
At the Olympics?
Yes.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think that this year's Olympics is going to be very exciting in terms, I think it's going to be a very level playing field, because no one team has been able to kind of get too far ahead. Everyone's been limited in the amount that they can train and the amount they can play matches and things like that. So I think that we're probably in a good place with our preparations, and usually, we would be a team that wouldn't get as many matches abroad. We're not a full-time program. We're sort of a semi-full-time program, and competing against the top nations who are full-time, it's always difficult. But I think that this year is going to be slightly different. And look, I think we're still a little bit of an underdog going in, it's our first Olympics. I think people are a little bit wary of us. So, I think, I know as a team, we're confident that we can win a medal. And it's certainly a goal. So yeah, we'll just focus on our best performance each time, and I think that if we can do that, we'll have a good chance.
Brilliant. In it to win it, Nicci. In it to win it. Look, thank you for joining us. Deloitte Ireland are obviously proud partners of Team Ireland, so we wish you and all the other Olympians much success in Tokyo. My thanks to Paul as well and Louise. I'm going to hand over to Peter Glynn, who's going to introduce the second panel discussion.
Thanks, Darrell. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the panel discussion on cloud transformation. My name is Peter Glynn. I'm the TMT consulting partner for Deloitte Ireland. I'm accompanied by my wonderful colleague, Nicola Grant, who is our sales director in TMT Ireland, Deloitte. Our panel today, we have my fellow Deloitte partner, Rory Allen in consulting, who leads our cloud transformation practice. Rory has been with Deloitte over 16 years and has worked extensively in public sector. Also, we're delighted to be joined by Juliet Bramwell from Google Cloud, who is leading their UK and Ireland media and telco practice. Juliet joined Google Cloud 4 years ago. She's been in sales for 25 years and worked in companies such as BT, CSC, Siemens and Atos. She's also worked extensively across large clients in the UK media sector and also the government sectors. As aligned with the Deloitte TMT predictions, the pandemic has been a catalyst for advanced cloud transformation across all industries. In this panel, we will discuss this and also touch on topics of what does cloud transformation actually mean, how do we get started, tips and tricks, and also interesting areas of sustainability. Hello, Rory, Juliet. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the webcast.
Hi, Juliet and Rory. Lovely to see you both again. So we'll get started. The Deloitte TMT predictions highlights that the pandemic has been a catalyst in the growth of cloud transformation. Some organisations have experienced over 2 years of cloud transformation growth in just under 2 months. Rory, I might ask you to give us a little bit more detail around what exactly is cloud transformation and what are the key business benefits.
Thanks, Nicola. Lovely to see you as well. hot topic for sure. Fair to say it's top of mind for executives and C-suite in many of our clients. And COVID has undoubtedly had a big impact in that. We have seen from the data that IT spend has increased substantially over the last 12 to 18 months. And within that, cloud is the fastest growing area within within technology adoption. The lines between business and technology continue to blur more than ever. And within that, we're seeing our clients have to shift to be much more technology focused and in many ways being asked to become more like product companies. When we reflect on what cloud transformation is, really we mean that's business transformation. So it's not really about cloud technology, it's what cloud makes possible, and it as a catalyst and an accelerator of business transformation. We have seen clients take new products and service to market much faster than before. We've seen new approaches in the supply chain, and we have seen government services being rolled out at paces never seen before to those most in need when they need it. There are clear IT benefits to cloud adoption, and we probably are all familiar with those in terms of scalability, the shift from CapEx to OpEx, more secure, more resilience, and ultimately delivering more agility to your business. But I think those that are unlocking the most value from cloud are those who are taking a very business transformation focus to it. So going in clear on the business benefits and willing to change how they do business and how they deliver to their customers to unlock the true value of cloud transformation.
Thank you, Rory. And it's very clear that businesses are reaping these benefits. There's been a surge in online customer demand and digital services which have forced businesses to accelerate their journey onto the cloud. Juliet, I might pass to you through the eyes of the Google Cloud Platform provider. And how have you seen your customer base evolve over the last 12 months? And indeed, what strategies are you using to drive further growth?
Hi, good to see you. So the obvious example is how working from home has accelerated companies' adoption of technology and tools, such as Google Workspace for video calls and collaboration. And we see that continuing into the future now. You know, the hybrid approach to working at home and office is definitely here to stay. The other area that is really growing dramatically is around data. And I would say that data has become even more important than ever as organizations are needing to leverage it in new ways to stay relevant, to acquire or retain customers, to find new revenue streams. So I think the data journey was already happening, but it's just become much more focused. You might have seen recently we've announced a partnership with Vodafone to do just that. So we're building a new data platform that provides reliable and secure data analytics, insights, learnings that's going to help them launch new products globally to their customers. So that's one example, but many use cases across the industries.
Thanks, Juliet. And it's very clear that there is that integrated ecosystem, which is very much alive at Google. Rory, I might pass over to you now through the client lens. And what are you doing to help our clients move to the cloud? Thanks,
Nicci. Yeah, a very broad spectrum of support with our clients. And, you know, back to earlier statements, you know, the level of interest and investment from our clients in this space, it continues to increase, which is great to see. Probably ranges from helping them set their vision and strategy and business case, right through to helping them implement and operate those services going forward. Adoption and client organizations, a kind of cloud adoption strategy really does vary by industry and vary by the maturity level of where they are today. We've seen small coffee shops adopt e-commerce to be able to click and collect, right through to the very biggest government departments investing in putting emergency payments online, and not just in Ireland, but internationally. You can see that trend. You know, the supply chain has been disrupted, where, you know, we as citizens need to get our groceries and our clothes, etc., delivered to our door when formerly walked into a shop, but also manufacturing and, you know, getting goods into the country has been very challenging, and cloud and technology has helped penetrate all of those business problems.
Juliet, would you see other benefits your customers are looking to deploy with cloud transformation? Like, for example, if you talk about better security or infrastructure consolidation?
Yeah, for sure. So best in class security, the importance of having a trusted cloud and that trust between customers and their cloud provider is key. And, we're seeing that using Google Cloud, clients are asking us to protect their systems, data, IP, and users in a way that they couldn't have done before when it was on-prem. I think also open cloud is key. I mean, we talk a lot about multi-cloud, and all companies are looking at their multi-cloud strategies. But at Google, we've always been open source, and I think we recognize that companies need to choose the right cloud for the right workload, have that choice. It encourages innovation. And, we really feel that that is the way forward for clients to get the best out of what cloud has to offer. And finally, the AI and ML that's embedded and enabled because you have cloud at scale. As we talked about data before, once you've got the data in one place, then how do you exploit it? Intelligence is everything. And how do you get those better data insights and make better decisions for your business? So there are a few things.
Yeah, and I'd also say, is there, the benefits of integrating the likes of other cloud order platforms, or even on the ad tech side, when you talk about Google Marketing Platform, is the benefit, can you unlock the benefit, obviously the customer data, but also integrating that with advanced ad tech capability as well? Do you see the benefits there from a Google perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at One Google as an approach, I think bringing the best of Google through, whether it is the marketing platform combined with the cloud, I also feel like bringing the culture of our engineering excellence and innovation that Google's has in its DNA is one of the things that we really pride ourselves on, having that engineering to engineering contact, but also bringing our culture in terms of ways of working, diversity, equity and inclusion. All of that builds this culture of innovation.
Brilliant, thanks. Rory, so keeping on cloud investments, how does a client map a transformation, say from a legacy on-premise infrastructure to potentially a multi-cloud environment? What do you think the key investment needs are for a client looking at that type of situation?
Great question, Peter. Actually, probably links back to my previous statement, which is, tech and the disruptive capability of cloud technology is part of it, but only, in a somewhat arbitrary figure, 25%. It's more about the people and the process. So you kind of have to get the skills right. And there is a journey to get your skills right. But a big part of it, and a conversation we get into really early with our clients, is around the operate. So when you get to cloud, which is a journey in itself, and you have to have the right business case, you have to be clear of the business value you're trying to unlock. When you get there, you need to be able to operate and get the best out of it. And really no different than if you had a set of suppliers in a different part of the business, you need to organize around that. Well, you need to organize around managing cloud. And we talk about the kind of establishment of a cloud business office, within that a cloud center of excellence to house your technology skills, and then cloud FinOps. So, while the shift from CapEx to OpEx is fantastic, well, actually, when cloud takes off and your business transformation is successful, you can be surprised sometimes by the monthly bill that's coming at you. So it kind of, setting yourself up to understand that, having the right skills to manage it, and, making that part of, everything from your executive pack all the way down, that you have that kind of full end-to-end operate model that makes sure you're picking the right tech, which comes back to the multi-cloud, for the right business problem, and then you're managing it when you get there.
Yeah, you could definitely see, the forecasting of spend around cloud spend, especially in the multi-cloud environment, as being definitely a hot topic when it comes to clients, and sort of managing and forecasting that projected spend for their cloud infrastructure. I suppose, Juliet, like from a Google Cloud Platform perspective, how do you handle multi-cloud environments? I'm sure you integrate easily into that type of ecosystem, and that's sort of the way you try to position Google Cloud Platform.
Yeah, I mean, we totally appreciate that customers' needs are evolving, and one cloud approach doesn't fit like it maybe used to. So we do have a offering called Anthos, which is our multi-cloud orchestration solution. And that's that's how we're seeing clients adopt and move forward to be able to use not just on other clouds, but also their on-premise infrastructure. But I do appreciate what Rory's saying in terms of the FinOps side is something that we're working together with our clients on how best to look at the spend, obviously optimize the solutions. But there's so much more to do in terms of setting that operating model up. And I totally agree with Rory about it being driven from the leadership level. We've seen a lot of cloud projects that start quite rightly in technology teams, but then as they grow, it needs to take the whole organization with it. And that has to come from the top.
Great. So maybe just to flip to a new topic around sustainability, which is a burning priority globally. So Juliet, can you tell us a little bit more about what Google Cloud are doing in this space to help organizations reduce their carbon footprint?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic. You know, in 2021, we've seen more, and we will see more companies make their carbon neutral pledges. You may have already seen Google Cloud recently committed to running its business on carbon-free energy everywhere in the world by 2030. You know, we see the data center consumption growing extraordinarily quickly. You know, 1% of the world's energy is consumed by data centers today. So with more and more data, that's just going to get bigger. And so we see two ways of meeting those pledges. One is what we call the greening of IT. So that's reducing the immediate impact of IT operations and lowering those associated emissions. And then the other way is greening by IT. So that's using IT innovation to reimagine solutions and business models to be more sustainable. And if I look specifically at our data centers, you know, we have highly efficient servers. They're generally 2x more energy efficient than a typical enterprise data center. We also use energy efficient TPUs. So these are our tensor processing units, very highly efficient compute chips to run machine learning applications. Another nice example in Finland, we're using the seawater for the cooling system. So again, that is, you know, looking at innovative ways to cool down the data center. So there's lots of ways that we're using AI to improve the actual efficiency of how the data center is run.
Yeah, it's really fascinating and innovative. And Rory, are you experiencing the same with your clients?
Yeah, it's you know, right to Juliet's point, we're really seeing it again, a top topic at the C-suite and executive level. And interestingly, we're seeing that become more and more part of the executive agenda, which means if you're going to present a technology transformation business case, you need to put your sustainability lens on that. And within that, you know, short of us all putting down our phones and stop buying online, which isn't going to happen, the large cloud providers and hyperscalers have a very, very strong investment in this space. And in reality, Juliet point, whether it's 2x or whatever it is, the ability for the hyperscalers to invest at scale to really squeeze the sustainability out of their data centers is going to outstrip individual enterprises who ultimately collectively won't be able to run as carbon neutral. So I think it's a very compelling offering in the cloud space to be able to take advantage of the sustainable nature of it.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant. So, so in closing, if I ask, okay, if we were to give your key tips on mobilizing a cloud transformation or thinking of moving to the cloud, what would be your key tips? I'll ask Rory first, and then Juliet, I'll move on to you. I'll limit you, Rory, to two key tips. Two, yeah.
I suppose, listen, if you haven't started, get started. And then within that, I think, you know, go business problem led, invest in solving a problem you have, be willing to fail fast, and, you know, follow through. That's really probably, you know, it will be worth the investment.
Brilliant, thanks. And Juliet, I won't limit you to a number.
Yeah, I think Rory had more than two there, but I'm just going to go with one. It's a big one, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, but it's building a culture for cloud. So for me, cloud is no longer just an IT infrastructure decision. It's infused into a company's culture and drives those new operating models. So trying to establish that culture of continuous innovation to keep pace with the change that is inevitably always happening and always happening very quickly, it is super important, and trying to empower those teams to move away from those top-down strategies that they might have had, to empower the teams to start trying out these new ways of working is really important.
So I guess, to close, just to thank you both for your time today. It was definitely a thought-provoking and interesting session. And I look forward to seeing what happens next year. Where does cloud transformation bring us? And hopefully, Juliet, will welcome you to Dublin.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Peter, for that. I think that was a really informative panel discussion. I'd like to thank all our speakers today and all our contributors. I think it's been hopefully an informative session around our TMT predictions, and look out for hopefully another one in the series sometime soon. Thank you very much.